Hi, and welcome back to ADK Talks, the podcast from adktaste.com, your curated guide to the best places, people, and experiences across the Adirondacks. Each week, we go a little deeper, talking with people shaping the culture, community, character of this incredible 6 million acre park. Today's episode is part of our Kitchen Confidential ADK Edit series, where we pull back the curtain on the people behind Adirondack dining, not just what's on the plate, but what it actually takes to run kitchens, build teams, and create meaningful food experiences in a wild place like this. I'm super excited about today's guest, who brings a perspective we haven't explored yet, because he's not just cooking the food, he's helping shape the people who will. We're joined today by Chef Robert Dumas, director of the Institute of Adventure Hospitality and Food at Paul Smith's College. Over a 20-plus year career, he's gone from washing dishes to cooking for President Obama at the White House, and now leads one of the top culinary programs in the country, right here in the Adirondacks. If you've ever wondered what it really takes to become a chef, or what Adirondack cuisine even means, this is a great episode to stick around for. Chef Dumas, welcome to the podcast.
Jane, thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm excited for the opportunity to talk to you today.
Awesome. Can you explain for our listeners, just in a nutshell, what is the Institute of Adventure Hospitality and Food?
Yeah, so to put it very succinctly, it represents the culinary, baking, and hospitality and resort management programs at Paul Smith's College. It is a little bit of a departure from the traditional academic model of students only engaging in academic instruction, and it's an opportunity for our program to really lean into our community, to invest in our stakeholders and farms and other food producers in our region, strengthen those relationships, both through aligning our academic efforts, as well as looking at grant opportunities to build out infrastructure and capacity for training and food processing, et cetera, in the region, all while staying somewhat aware of the kind of unique Adirondack setting that we have and our longstanding history for adventure hospitality.
I find that phrase, adventure hospitality, really interesting. Can you just expand a little bit on that?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to kind of think about adventure hospitality is when folks travel to a region with an intention around enjoying recreation, and the Adirondacks, that recreation, I would say most often takes the form of outdoor recreation, and then there's a hospitality experience that either supports that activity or is part of that recreation. And so, some examples would be, going on a guided fishing trip, going on an Adirondack Mountain Club hike that culminates in a dinner experience or a campfire experience with your cohort that you're engaging in those activities. So, I think it's really when nature and hospitality converge.
What types of students are drawn to the program?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I've spent a lot of my, I've been in this position for roughly 1 year, and a lot of my efforts over this past year have been rebuilding relationships with our feeder programs, and in a lot of cases, our best feeder programs are high school culinary art tech programs. And as I'm out meeting with these prospective students, I think the type of students that really resonate with our value proposition at Paul Smith's are students that are looking for an opportunity to experience something very real, something rooted in the natural environment, something rooted in a connection to both other people, but also to a landscape. Some of our competitors in the state and in the region are very big schools, and for the most part, they're in metropolitan areas. And some young people, I think, are experiencing let's call it a little bit of burnout, burnout from, social media and from this kind of pervasive nature of technology to infiltrate every aspect of our lives. And they can feel it when they go outside. They can feel it when they're on our smaller campus, with our smaller student to instructor ratio. They feel like they belong, and they feel like a sense of community that they maybe haven't found in the urban environment that they're coming from, or in a more populous school that they've toured or visited.
For our listeners, Paul Smith's is remote. It's beautiful. You're about, I don't know, about 30 minutes north of Saranac Lake, maybe. Steve, you're good at geography. Is that about right?
It's not quite half an hour, is it?
No, it's about 15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes.
But it's a pretty remote area. And I actually think that might work to your advantage. As you said, it's, for people that really love nature, it's got to be a wonderful place to go to college. Your campus is beautiful. Let's just rewind a little bit. How did you get into food in the first place?
I was a military brat. Both my parents were in the Air Force, and I ended up growing up for most of my formative years just outside of New Orleans. And in Louisiana, it's kind of hard to avoid food or not be excited about food. It's part of the fabric of the culture down there. And as a kid, I just always had an enthusiasm for eating things, for exploring food, going and picking strawberries. My parents had a garden that, I found it fascinating that, this little tiny seed became this big plant covered in tomatoes. And as I got into high school, I think I found that I wasn't, the most scholarly young man. Sitting in math class or English class, my mind wandered. I didn't always do the best in terms of, doing my homework, etc. But I got a job when I was 14, so it was between 8th grade and 9th grade, and that job was at a Chinese restaurant on the edge of my neighborhood that I could ride my bicycle to after school, and I washed dishes there. And that was one of the first times that I really felt like I kind of fit in with a group of people, even though most of the cooks didn't speak English. But we had this like shared sense of urgency around the pace and the intensity of, the guests are here, we've got to work, we've got to move, And that made a big impact on me in terms of like, okay, this is a community of people, doing a job that, I feel like I could get into this. And, and I would also highlight, this was the late 90s, right? This is the beginning of kind of the chef as the celebrity. You start seeing people like Emeril Lagasse and, Bobby Flay, and the Food Network is, growing in popularity. And all of a sudden, there was this kind of transformation of like, the chef as like a craftsman to this chef as like a cultural icon. And I started to think, well, this is pretty cool. Like I could get really good at cooking and live in some big city and, drive a fancy car and, be a big deal. And, as a little bit of a nod to the name of your podcast, Anthony Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential, was something that I read as a teenager. And it just really reinforced that, like, community of misfits that I felt right at home in the kitchen. And so I think that's how I really kind of came to hospitality, is it's a place I felt like I fit in, and it was a place that I felt like I could make a life.
You've had a really interesting career. I mean, you were in the military, right? Because I read in your bio that you cooked on a submarine, which has to be challenging.
Yeah, that's got to be wild.
Yeah, so I did. Throughout my teenage years, I worked in the New Orleans area, ended up, gaining kind of some responsibility in the kitchen, ultimately was the kitchen manager of a pretty nice restaurant before I left. And I kind of realized that there was maybe a need for better mentorship and more training. And I thought that the opportunity for me to access that was to go to culinary school. The path for me to go to culinary school was to earn my GI Bill. I think that was obviously heavily influenced by that being the path that both of my parents took. They were both active duty and utilize those benefits to pay for school. My dad encouraged me to look at the Navy. He thought the Navy had the best kind of translatable skills from active duty to the civilian world in terms of food service. And I ended up signing up to go into the Navy, and it wasn't necessarily my plan all along to go to submarines. It was a little bit of a sales pitch by the recruiter. To be a submariner, you have to do a little bit better on your entrance exams for the military, and you also have to be able to pass some background investigation stuff to earn a secret clearance. The way that the recruiter explained this to me was that by having that clearance and by having that kind of sub experience on my resume, it would open up some better opportunities for my career in the Navy if I chose to re-enlist and stay in. One of those opportunities, notably, was the chance to work at the White House. And with those experiences working as a personal chef for the government or for the highest level of military leadership, you got extra training, and that training looked like going to places like the Culinary Institute of America or other training opportunities. And for me, I was like, well, that's the whole reason I'm joining the Navy, is to access that experience, those training opportunities. So sign me up. If the submarine's the way for me to get there, I'll do it. And it did, I mean, surprisingly, it actually all panned out, and I did get a chance to work at the White House, but the submarine wasn't, in retrospect, it wasn't the only pathway there, but perhaps it did help. So, yeah.
That's so good. You know what? I'm so tempted to go down a total rabbit hole on cooking on a submarine. So I'm trying to edit myself because we could spend the whole podcast talking about that.
It's got some unique challenges, I can imagine.
Yeah, I would have to imagine that too. What eventually drew you, though, to teaching and to Paul Smith's in particular?
So I would offer to touch briefly on the time in the military as what drew me to teaching. And so the submarine was an environment where I quickly grew in my leadership responsibilities. Because I had all that culinary experience and because I had gone to some culinary post-secondary training in New Orleans before the military, I ended up growing in rank really quickly in the Navy. And as you grow in rank, you grow in responsibility, and your job really changes from doing the physical task to supervising the people doing the physical task. And so I found myself as a very young guy in the military, supervising a team that had a really important job. We fed 150 people 4 meals a day, and we did so in an environment where they had absolutely no other option to get something to eat, right? And so not only did we have to do our job well for the health and well-being of the crew, it also influenced the morale and the esprit de corps, right? The overall mental well-being of the unit. Furthermore, there was no Hannaford on the corner that we could stop by and grab some eggs if we ran out, right? Like, we loaded up before we hit the ocean, and we didn't see food again until we hit a port somewhere. And in a lot of ways, our operational efficacy was only limited by the amount of food that we could carry. A modern nuclear submarine can more or less operate indefinitely at sea. The limiting factor is the fact that we got to feed people, right, that run the submarine. And so as cooks, we had a really important responsibility to kind of oversee that supply of food and be good stewards of that. As I kind of started to wrap my head around that responsibility, I came to see that, the way that I engaged with my colleagues or my subordinates was of the utmost importance, in that I had a direct impact on the well-being of the whole mission and the whole crew through doing so. And I had some early successes. I had, some junior sailors that I was kind of given the responsibility of overseeing, and we did a really good job on the sub. We served great food. The crew loved it, and it really made a strong impact on me that, the chance to help someone else grow is one of the most meaningful and rewarding things that you can do in your life. And so when I got to the White House, I once again found myself kind of in a leadership position. I had gotten selected for E7, so I was going to be a chief petty officer. And as an E7, you really are kind of a trainer. That's your role, is overseeing and training. And so as a prospective chief, they really leaned on me to embrace that role wholeheartedly. And I began really training and kind of upskilling the team there. And one of the ways that we did that was through an organization called the American Culinary Federation, or the ACF for short. The ACF is the credentialing body for chefs in the United States. So when you see a chef that has, certified sous chef or certified executive chef embroidered on their coat, that 9 times out of 10 is an accreditation that is awarded by the ACF. And at the White House, we put a lot of effort into helping our team members earn those certifications. And I actually oversaw a training program where our junior team members would stay after work and we would cook and we would study. And I really kind of started to feel like, wow, I'm like a culinary arts instructor. This is really cool. And I saw my colleagues earn their certifications and come back and, and express gratitude and appreciation for the opportunity to have those training sessions and to learn. And that really cemented for me that, like, cooking for people is rewarding and enjoyable, but helping cultivate skills and helping grow, a community is even more rewarding. And so when I left the military, I actually took a position at the New England Culinary Institute in Vermont, and that's what gave me my first opportunity both to teach at the collegiate level, but also to wrap up my bachelor's degree using that GI Bill, which was my original kind of intent with joining the military. Fast forward a number of years, I came to Paul Smith's because it was a chance for me to really put my fingerprint on an organization. Paul Smith's has a long and storied history as a kind of hallowed institution in the world of hospitality education, and the setting of the school, while it's also our kind of selling factor for students, I think it's our selling factor for faculty in a lot of cases too. It's a chance to live where other people vacation, right? And so here at Paul Smith's, I think the crux of the appeal for me was a chance to take an established team and an established curriculum into some new territory. And also our campus is what I would call kind of a land of opportunity. We're a relatively small college from an administrative perspective. For context, I came from the University of Maine, a state school with, 7 campuses and, endless red tape and bureaucracy. It took an act of Congress to do just about anything there. Whereas here it's pretty quick and easy to get things done. And we've really hit the ground running this year. It's been exciting to see some of our early successes, and I can elaborate on those as we go further.
What does it mean to train a chef today versus when you started?
So I think that this generation of young people, they're a really thoughtful group of people. They're thoughtful about their impact on the world. They're thoughtful about their impact on their communities and each other, in kind of a different way than I think young people were of my generation. And I think that translates in the kitchen to a different leadership style, one that's less authoritarian. I think kitchens have had a reputation in the past of being a semi-hostile environment. I mean, there's a system of organization in the kitchen called the brigade system that was borrowed from the French army, right? I mean, they viewed the kitchen as like a military confrontation, and we had to organize like the military to get through it. And that's just, I think COVID really laid bare that this generation isn't interested in being treated that way. They're not interested in being barked at. They're not interested in these aggressive course corrections. They want to be treated like they have value, and they want to be taught rather than yelled at. And so I think that is that's an adjustment for us as instructors, because there is a sense of urgency that you do need to instill in a culinary professional, and that sense of urgency does come sometimes with very succinct communication. And so it's a little bit of a balance. I think there needs to be time to set the stage for the training activity, so clear communication of what it is that we're going to do and how we're going to accomplish it. And then I think there needs to be debrief after the fact of how did that training experience go? What did you learn? What parts of this were really challenging? What parts, did you not understand? And just really, taking the time to make sure that you're thorough as an educator and that you're inclusive of people's unique learning needs.
And those skills are so important in any career. I was at a conference once, and the speaker, the sort of guest speaker, was a Blue Angels pilot in the Blue Angels. And he talked about a process almost exactly like what you just described that they go through. They meet as a team. They talk about the mission or whatever they're going to do. They go through it and talk about it in advance. Then they execute, and then they come back together and debrief and talk about what worked well and what didn't work well and what they want to improve the next time. And it's in all places in life. I've had a corporate career before this, but always taking that time to discuss what you're going to do it, and then discuss how it went is so critical. So I never thought about it in terms of a kitchen or a professional kitchen, but that's very interesting. What do you think surprises your students the most when they sort of get into this, real professional kitchen environment?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is, teaching kind of kitchen awareness and sense of urgency. I think, in a lot of cases, our students have come from those high school programs, and the high school programs, really rely upon like sparking students' curiosity, as a jumping off point into this career field. And then when they come to college, while certainly, promoting curiosity and enthusiasm is important, we also have a responsibility to start to, establish those core habits that are so important to be a successful chef, and that is things like, moving with a sense of purpose from task to task, having good attention to detail, taking every element of working in the kitchen seriously, and I think that, it's a challenging thing to do that with young people. They're going through a lot of development emotionally and socially, and they're away from their families for the first time, and so it requires an empathetic understanding, and it's a challenge, to work in a kitchen environment where there isn't always a clear hierarchy or a clear mission amongst the cohort of students, and and I think that's one of the biggest adjustments is is we're here to learn together, and we're going to do so with a lot of seriousness and intention.
What separates a good cook from a great hospitality professional?
I guess to answer that question very literally, I think, if you look at kind of the different bodies of work, a great cook is someone who is going to have a real passion for ingredients, for processes, for flavor, for textures, and an ability to kind of walk the line between art and craftsmanship. That's a great cook. A great hospitality professional is someone who has a passion for people, someone who has a passion for experience and for cultivating experiences, and has a desire to, build systems that are orderly and that a lot of ways are invisible, right? To create kind of a guest experience that's, anticipates every need, anticipates, every expectation before they've even been stated. And I think that sort of intuition is hard to find in a person. And in a lot of ways, it's difficult to teach too, and is sometimes a skill that is perhaps inherent to a person.
Do you think that the not having the skills you just mentioned sort of defines success for folks? I mean, can you be successful if you don't have that other component?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people can be successful in the food industry in a number of different ways. The world of food is very dynamic and very diverse, and I think sometimes as chefs and as chef educators, we tend to put blinders on when we think about food, and we think about food just as this like luxurious experience, right? That people come and pay a lot of money for, and that we get to cook with the best ingredients. But the reality is people eat 3 times a day, every single day, right? And there is a chance to engage in the food economy in a number of different ways, and some of them is the everyday act of feeding people nourishing, well-prepared food. And I think that it isn't all about that kind of high-end, high-caliber, food service professional. There are great careers to be had in things like institutional food service, working in colleges, universities, working in healthcare. And in a lot of ways, those are really meaningful, important jobs, and they certainly require the same level of professionalism and the same level of skill, but perhaps don't require the same degree of anticipating, I guess, needs, as it pertains to cultivating a, world-class and memorable experience with that plate of food. They're paying $11 for lunch versus, $400 a person or whatever for, a multi-course meal.
You mentioned something earlier that I want to go back to. Your students do work with local farms and producers. What does that look like? How does that get started?
Yeah, so that's something I'm actually really proud of at Paul Smith's, and I think it's a credit to the institution long before I had any influence. And so, um, the incoming freshmen have a class called Farm to Table, and every Friday these students show up to class at 8 a.m. We jump in a van and we take a field trip to meet the producers in the Adirondack region, and we get to go to their farms. We get to feed apples to their cows and pigs. We get to taste the cheeses. We get to talk to the producers, and we get to really learn about what it means to steward a crop, from its inception to its ultimate consumption, and the role that they get to play in that. And I think it helps establish that sense of responsibility, that's so important for cooks to have, that this food that I've purchased and that I'm going to prepare for someone is something that I need to respect, right? Because a lot of effort went into producing this, and I should honor that effort by seeing it through preparation. And the farm to table class, it's highly regarded by our freshmen as one of their favorite classes. I mean, field trips almost always are, but it's also something where at the end of that course, they take those ingredients and they create a multi-course menu, and we invite the producers to come and kind of taste the food that we've created. And then furthermore, throughout their curriculum, the students will re-engage with those producers. Not so much in their theory classes where they're learning how to make, chicken stock or learning how to make a mother sauce. But once they get into our student-run restaurants, they start to see those ingredients again featured on our seasonal menus, and they see those things featured in our bakery and cafe, and it's part of our commitment to the region, to participate in our local food economy, but it's also part of our identity as chefs at Paul Smith's, that we want to be known as people who honor our region and honor our seasons in the food that we create.
Is the intention also that when they leave school and they're out in their culinary careers, now they know how to establish relationships with local food producers too? It gives them that sort of experience doing that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's important for them to realize the role that a chef can play in a food system, and important for them to realize that producers want to meet and work with chefs, and that chefs in a lot of cases are the best advocates for local food, right? They're this crucial link between, these people who are working incredibly hard to grow and raise this food and the consumers. And so, yeah, absolutely. It definitely is training for that. And it is also, I think, fitting with the traditions of classical French cuisine, which is what most modern culinary education is still rooted in, is this idea that, your season and your region should, influence the food you put on your menu.
Interesting. Any local producers you can mention by name that we should have on our radar?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Juniper Hill Farm in Wadhams is, growing some fantastic produce. We work with them quite a bit. We also work with Harmony Hills. They have some fantastic pork and beef. We have good relationships with the folks from Farmer Ground. They're growing and milling New York grown grains, and that's something that I enjoy doing programming with. And we actually have a wood-fired oven that's going to get delivered in a couple of weeks, and we'll be doing some really cool baking with local grains and our wood-fired oven. Yeah, and a number of other producers, that we visit, and I think Aaron over at Cape Mountain Farm is a really innovative and entrepreneurial producer too, and he's actually bought a restaurant in Saranac Lake, so I'm excited for some more collaboration with him, as he is certainly living at the intersection of food production, both from an agricultural perspective and from a hospitality perspective.
Is there a specific local ingredient or product that, defines the region for you?
That's a tough question, and I think it is coming from Maine. I can't help but kind of frame that from the perspective of, in Maine we have lobster, we have wild blueberries, right? These things that are so iconically Maine. I think here in the Adirondacks, this is this is a rugged environment, right? Of high elevation, of cold winters. And I don't think that we have a specific agricultural product that is representative of this region, right? That when people say, oh, wild blueberries, that's the Adirondacks, right? Maple syrup is something that I think we've got a really strong relationship with here at the college and in the region. We have our own sugar bush on campus, and we are very proud of our Smitty made maple syrup, and I think it's a great representation of a really sustainable ingredient that has a unique flavor, and in my opinion, it has a much more broad application than pancake syrup, right? There's so much you can do with maple, and it's a great ingredient. I would also offer, I've recently learned kind of the etymology of the word Adirondack, and it's bark eater, right? And it's, these people that were going to live off the forest. And I think that there's a really fun opportunity to interpret that as a way to let seasonal kind of boreal forest ingredients infuse your cuisine. And so I think of things like wild mushrooms, wild leeks or ramps, looking at these kind of wild foraged ingredients as a way to pay homage to the region's food history, going all the way back to the indigenous, residents of the region, and, really honoring their contributions to what is modern cuisine in North America.
So Michigan sauce on your hot dogs doesn't quite qualify as a culinary example.
Yeah, the Michigans is an interesting thing, and I think it speaks to kind of the European diaspora and like how different communities came to concentrate in areas. And I wouldn't say that the Michigan, which for listeners that aren't familiar with what that is, it's a Plattsburgh kind of specialty of a hot dog topped with a sweet or spicy meat sauce, sort of like a chili dog. While a fun culinary treat, I don't know that it's necessarily the kind of gastronomic delight that we're trying to create at Paul Smith's.
No.
Yeah.
But I think the hot dog's kind of having a moment right now.
For sure.
We had another chef on, I think last year, who, a very nice restaurant, actually in Elizabethtown, the Deer's Head Inn, who, so hot dogs were part of his menu. Like, he did really cool, inventive things with hot dogs. So let's respect the good old American baseball hot dogs and Chevrolet, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Where can people find out more about the culinary program at Paul Smith's? Is there, is it on your website? Does the culinary program have any presence on social media?
Yeah, I think the best place to follow along with the culinary program is through our Paul Smith's webpage. We've recently launched a new webpage within the last 6 months, and it is a little bit of a process of migration of old web content as well as development of new web content. The Institute of Adventure Hospitality and Food has a unpublished page that we're actively working on, and it will be public in the next few months with a lot more content in terms of upcoming workshops, events, opportunities to engage with our students in our restaurants, etc. We're right on the precipice of launching that. For social media, again, I would encourage folks to look at the Paul Smith's College Facebook, Instagram, etc. Great place to follow along with what's happening, and they do a wonderful job of highlighting things that are happening in our culinary program. I would say as we continue to grow, we probably will expand our social presence a little bit. But right now, that's probably the best way to follow along.
I think it's also, we would be remiss if we didn't point out that Paul Smith's really started as a hotel. And the original Paul Smith ran a huge hotel on the property, and was very successful. And as a result, his offspring were able to endow the college and found the college. I've got that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And in a lot of ways, it would be useful to add to that, that the hotel was a place that people went not only for great lodging, but also for great food and for outdoor experiences. In a lot of ways, it is definitionally adventure hospitality, right? Going back to, turn of the century folks coming up from the city, by horse or by rail, up to the Adirondacks to experience the mountains, to experience the woods, to experience the lakes and waters, to engage in that outdoor recreation. So I kind of love to think about this new chapter of our programs being a return to our roots.
The culinary program at Paul Smith's ranks among the top programs in the U.S. So I imagine your students, they get a great education and then they may scatter into the wind to other places. What role do you think Paul Smith's is playing in the future of dining within the Adirondacks?
While it is certainly true that our students, spread their wings and fly far sometimes, the SMITty community, and I should preface that SMITty is what a lot of our alumni kind of self-identify as. It's, Paul Smith's, you're a SMITty. And they're present throughout the region in a number of capacities. One local alum that I would highlight is John LeClaire. He has a restaurant in Potsdam, and he is also the culinary arts instructor in Ogdensburg at their BOCES program. And John is not only transforming local ingredients into things for folks in the community to eat, John is also crafting the next generation of young people that are entering into this craft and doing so remarkably well. John's students were down competing, in the Pro Start competition for the New York State Restaurant Association, just a few weeks ago, and did very well. Produced, food that was as good as the programs from the big city, right? And that's a good example of kind of our, SMITty footprint in the region. But also folks like Justin Congdon. He is an alum that went down to the city, worked at 11 Madison Park under Daniel Hume, right? 3 Michelin star restaurant, #1 restaurant in the world for a bunch of years. And Justin has come back to the Adirondacks to raise his family, to live, to be part of our community. And he's the executive chef for a local restaurant group that has multiple properties, right? And, and he's a SMITty. So I think, this place has a way of getting into your bones, right? And it makes an impression on you. And even if you go away, it doesn't mean that you aren't going to come back, right? And I think that Paul Smith's is kind of a cornerstone of the Tri-Lakes community. Both from our influence on the culinary department, but also just from our influence on the North Country's economy.
Definitely. I mean, you're not going to find an Olive Garden up here. You're not going to find it like a lot of fast casual places. They're owner operated, or they're unique to the region, and we need more of them. So that's great to hear. For someone visiting the Adirondacks, what should they look for in a great dining experience?
I think when I look at somewhere to go to eat, I oftentimes will preview the menu. And when I preview the menu, what I'm looking for is a menu that, calls out some seasonal ingredients, right? And you don't have to be a food expert to know that, tomatoes aren't in season in February, right? So if somewhere is serving, bruschetta or caprese salad and it's the middle of winter, they're maybe not giving you the best dining experience, from an ingredient sourcing perspective. So that's kind of one of the things that I'll look at. And in a best case scenario, you'll see a menu that highlights the local producers that they buy from. We have an organization run through Cornell Cooperative Extension up here called Adirondack Harvest.
Yep, they've been on the podcast. They're a great organization.
Yeah. Adirondack Harvest is something that, if a restaurant is a member and they put that on their menu, that's a great sign, right? That means that they are participating in that local food economy. And then, the last thing I would say is I think that a menu that is succinct is oftentimes a menu that is that the chefs are paying a lot of attention to every element of, right? When you've got page after page after page of dishes, there's likely going to be some losers on that menu, right? So that's what I look for.
For aspiring chefs who might be listening to this episode, what's one piece of advice that you could give them?
I think for young chefs, it's important to cultivate enthusiasm and curiosity for cuisine, right? I think it's wonderful to, follow, food pages on social media and to, be excited about trends and cool ingredients. But the reality is that like you got to marry that curiosity and that enthusiasm with craftsmanship, and craftsmanship comes through repetition, right? It comes through being serious about this thing that you're going to do and doing it over and over again until you build muscle memory, until you build a kind of reflexive nature in the kitchen and in working with food ingredients, and that takes time, and I think having empathy for yourself to make mistakes, to learn, is really important. And so I think, that's the best advice that I would give to a young person is be curious, be enthusiastic, but build craftsmanship and take your time.
Yeah, I remember I read the book Heat. I forget who the author is.
Bill Buford.
Bill Buford. And he talked in the very beginning of the book, that's one of the points he makes is that when you go to a restaurant and you have, your favorite dish, every time you go back, you want it exactly the same way every single time. And that's what really separates a chef from, a really good home cook. Not to knock home cooks. Steve is actually the star in our family in that area.
Nothing ever tastes the same.
Nothing ever tastes the same. Yeah. Well, yeah, to make things exactly the same every single time takes just incredible discipline and talent, really. I just know in, cooking a piece of fish, how you really know when it's time to flip the sole before it falls apart kind of thing is that, something I've had to practice many, many times over. I can't imagine doing it in the, high pressure, professional kitchen, and that it's got to be a real challenge. I guess along those lines, what should people not underestimate about working in this industry? What should they not take with a grain of salt, I guess is one way to put that.
I think I'd say two things to that. One, I think that people shouldn't underestimate the fact that working in the hospitality industry is actually a lot of fun, right? I think it has a reputation sometimes of being this environment that's stressful, that's like, physically demanding, that's emotionally demanding. And it is those things, I'm not trying to downplay that, but I also think it's an opportunity to find community amongst people who share your passion for this craft, and that community of people can become lifelong friends and almost like extended family members, because you'll go through challenging days together, and hardship builds connection, right? And so I think that that's really important, and something that I want to lead with, because I think that our industry is kind of hurting right now in terms of people, and I think folks should give it a chance, right? And if they like that sensory stimulation of working with food, they might find that the kitchen is a place that is just a privilege to get to make a career. And then the second thing that I would say in terms of entering into it with your eyes open is that it is an environment that is going to stimulate all of your senses all day, every day. And that is such a privilege, right? I unfortunately spend quite a bit of time at my desk now, and when I go in the classroom and I'm with the students, I just can't help but smile when I hear a pan sizzling when I lay a piece of chicken in it, or I hear a knife chopping as a student is going through, some parsley or some basil. I can hear the, deep fire bubbling, the oven fan going, and it's a symphony of sights, smells, sounds, and that is just intoxicating for me, and I absolutely love it. And so I think folks, especially people who maybe identify as a little bit neurodivergent, shouldn't underestimate the opportunity to, find just a really wonderful and meaningful way to, engage in our economy through food.
I have to ask this question because so many things you've said today remind me of the show, The Bear. Have you watched it?
I did watch The Bear. Yeah.
I'm sensing in your voice that maybe, what did you think? Is it realistic? Is it not realistic?
I think The Bear is an exploration of this idea of kind of, self-sacrifice for excellence, right? And I think in so many different mediums, there's an opportunity to kind of destroy yourself a little bit to be the best, right? Like whether we're talking about being an athlete or a musician or a chef, there is this chance to, just put everything else aside and to just relentlessly strive to be the best. And it takes a toll on you. And I think that show really did a good job of painting that picture of Carmi, of someone who kind of like just wrecked himself and ultimately kind of hit rock bottom. And his opportunity for redemption was in this, I don't know, wild and colorful, exploration of his roots and his family, and this story that, in a lot of ways, he didn't know because he had just left, right, and he went to pursue his own thing, and there were elements of kind of trauma that came up time and time again, as Carmi struggled with what his formative years in the kitchen did to him, and I think in some ways, the other things that I've touched on in this podcast were almost meant to kind of repair the image of hospitality that shows like The Bear have painted. That is real. I mean, I worked in the highest level of food service at the White House, right? I mean, there was absolutely nothing less than perfection that was acceptable. And it was a demanding and brutal environment to work in. And my colleagues all drank that same Kool-Aid, right? Every single one of us, worked like dogs, to our detriment. And I don't know that it has to be that way. I think that there is another path. Humans love to look at examples of people pushing the limits, right? I think that's why we watch things like the Olympics, right? That's why we, get so excited about famous musicians and things like that. It is inspiring to see people push themselves. And sometimes we, lose sight of the fact that it takes a real toll on people. And I think, that show did a decent job of representing that while also just being very dramatic. I couldn't work in an environment like that personally, where people are screaming and throwing things and, being just over the top like that. But, I guess it makes for good television.
It makes for good TV. Yeah, the closest I've come to working in a professional kitchen was a waitress one summer up here in the Southern Adirondacks. Nothing gives you more appreciation for that service industry in a kitchen than working in it and seeing, the kitchen was nothing like what was on The Bear, but it was high pressure. And as we talked about earlier, the, pressure to perform, perfectly and turn out, great dishes, it's real. And serving people is hard work. And I honestly think everybody should have to work in the service industry at some point in their lives, because it gives you a lot of perspective of what it's like to make people happy, and all the different things that can go wrong and how much they managed so that you don't see out in the dining room what's going on out in the kitchen. So it's interesting. You've mentioned, Chef, that there are student-run restaurants on campus. Are those open to the public?
Yes. So we have right now 2 different outlets that we're running that are public facing. And one of them is our student-run bakery, which we call AP Smith's. And it's open during the academic year. So we have classes from September through May. And we typically run the bakery from 9 to 1 o'clock, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The student-run restaurant is what we call the Gansey. It was a gift from Walter Gansey, who's one of our alumni that went on to own and operate many of the Palm steakhouses. And so Walter built a mini Palm steakhouse for us in Cantwell Hall. And we operate that as a lunch outlet as well, operating from about 11 to 1, again, during the academic year. And most often, both of those outlets are tied to classes. So in the example of the bakery, right now it's running as part of our senior capstone for our bakers. So these are students in their 4th year of baking. and they are taking over the bakery, running it as their own concept, and getting to, create a menu and aesthetic and, kind of a marketing strategy, et cetera, and then run the bakery as a representation of kind of their culminating experience. In the restaurant, we also have senior capstones happening right now, but I would say more likely you would come in to experience our sophomore or junior level classes, where the students are exploring concepts such as contemporary cuisine or modern gastronomy, and they are cooking, farm to table menus, exploring different educational concepts through the real world application of cooking for people. The opportunity to come and dine with us is going to get a lot easier once our new website launches, because we'll have the ability to book your spot, at 11:30 on October 17th, or whatever. Right now, our reservation system is a little bit dated, so it's an email reservation system, and I think it serves our immediate campus community best. But our hope is to start really scaling that. And I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too early, but we have the beautiful lakefront restaurant, which the school stopped operating during COVID, and we are in some early talks with a design firm for renovating that space with an aim to reopen it at some point in the next, let's say, 12 months. And that will be opened up as a real state-of-the-art kitchen with just best of the best, kitchen equipment and Adirondack lakefront dining looking out over St. Regis Mountain. And it's going to be fantastic when we get that open. And the intention there is to operate that throughout the summer as well. It's a little bit tough for us as a college. We only have students on campus September through May. Obviously, May through September is peak tourism season in the Adirondacks. And so we definitely have our eyes set on figuring out some summer, internships or summer semester, so that our students can stay on and work in the restaurant and really tap into that tourist demographic as well.
That's amazing. I cannot wait for that. The setting of Paul Smith's is just so beautiful, and to be able to experience it from a dining perspective, I think would be awesome. Well, Chef Dumas, this has been a great episode. I've loved hearing your insights. I have a couple rapid fire questions for you if you're up for it.
Sure.
All right. Favorite Adirondack season?
Winter. Yeah. I came here to ski.
Good answer.
What's your go-to meal after a long day, maybe a long day of skiing?
You know what? I really love ramen or any brothy soup. I love a well-made stock or broth, and whatever you put in it is going to be a pleasure to eat.
What's your perfect trail snack?
I actually really like a date that you take the seed out of and you fill it with peanut butter and maybe put like a little piece of dark chocolate in there and a mandarin. That's like a perfect little trail snack.
I think I want that right now. That sounds amazing. I'll have to try that. All right, last one. Butter, salted or unsalted? I
like salted butter. I think it is more often than not that food needs a little more salt to taste good. And, the butter just kind of helps get you there. I will say in like professional applications, I'll often use unsalted, but at home, I buy salted butter.
All right. That's a big debate in our family.
Yeah.
So that's good to hear your perspective. Before we set you out into the wild, Chef, if somebody is really interested in a culinary career and learning more about Paul Smith's, what should they do?
Yeah, I think it's really important for any prospective student to come for a tour. That's the number one most important thing to do. Reach out to our admissions department. They have an easy calendar to schedule a tour. Register for a tour. If for some reason the tour dates don't work for you, we also have open houses. The open houses are wildly good time. Our winter open house had an ice fishing rodeo, axe throwing, a bonfire. We must have fed those people 4,000 calories during their visit. There were so many good things to eat. And it was just and horse-drawn sled and carriage rides around campus as well. So come to campus, experience a little taste of what it is to be a Smitty, and to get to be part of this community for 2 or 4 years as an associate's or a bachelor's student. That's our biggest point of differentiation. It's the community that we cultivate here, and I think, and it's our setting. And so that would be the number one thing I would recommend. And and I would also state it's not for everyone, right? I mean, some folks might really want to be in an environment where there's a Starbucks less than 10 minutes from them, right? And we are definitely not that, right? And so, make sure it's a good fit for you.
The first time I was up there, was actually staying in Tupper Lake with my bestie Pam, and we went up to the Vic. And as long as we're here, we've got to check out the campus. And we were like, where do they get their pizza and wings? It's just, It's definitely, and there's a beauty to that remoteness. It's not a knock on the school, but you need to think, I would want to have my eyes wide open, and understand exactly where it is. It's a beautiful campus, but it is remote.
Yeah.
Last thing, we end every episode by asking our guests to tell us about, a favorite spot in the Adirondacks or a hidden gem. And it can be anything. It can be a ski trail, a paddle, a camping spot, an ice cream shop, a museum, your favorite bar. It can be anything. If you had to give somebody your favorite spot or hidden gem, what would you say?
Just coming off of the winter season, and I'm going to sound like a company man here, but the Vic is such a hidden treasure. And I spent so many hours this winter skiing the trails of the Vic, and I probably saw less than 100 people over the course of the whole season, and probably 40 days of skiing or more out there. And so I feel like it's really a hidden gem, and somewhere that is just world class in terms of the quality of the trails, the diversity of the landscape, and the connection with nature. I would also add, thinking back to last summer and the opportunity to recreate in warmer weather, paddling in the St. Regis area. We did a multi-day canoe trip with my nephew out into the St. Regis canoe area, and got to see just families of loons and little baby loons, and camping out on the lake shore, listening to the loons sing at night was something that I feel like every person should get to experience. And if it doesn't make you want to, protect that environment, then I don't know what will.
Yeah, 100%. We are eagerly awaiting the return of the loons. In fact, in our social media, the other day, we like to post loon trivia, and it's very popular. Like, a lot of people like and share. So, kind of have to do it. But a couple people responded that they'd already heard loons this year, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, not to brag, but we're just off of the lake here in faculty housing on campus, and I've started hearing the loons this week as
really?
Also. So yeah, they're back.
All right, Chef, thank you again for spending time with us. This has been a really fascinating talk, and appreciate you sharing so much of your journey, and we hope to have you back someday.
Yeah, absolutely. Please come up for a visit. I'd love to show you around campus and, share a pastry or lunch or something from our students.
100%. Love that.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Steve.
Well, that was fun. That was really neat.
Yes, it was. It was, it's quite the program. You wouldn't think of that being available right in the heart of the Adirondacks, but a culinary school of that significance.
I mean, when I first heard about Paul Smith's, I first knew them for that hospitality program. I mean, they really have one of the best reputations in the U.S. So, it's really a treasure to have that in this environment. And I didn't realize they had on-campus restaurants.
Yeah, that was going to be a question I had, and I'm glad to hear.
Yeah, definitely worth the drive maybe this fall to go check that out when they get their reservation system.
Get a croissant.
Croissant. Oui, oui. All right, listener. Well, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the episode, you can find more conversations like this one on adktaste.com, where we highlight the best places, people, and experiences across the Adirondacks. Be sure to follow us on wherever you get your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music. And when you're there, drop us a review. It helps other people find more insights on the Adirondacks and great content. And if you're on our website, adktaste.com, you can also sign up for our newsletter. It's your weekly guide to Adirondack stories, food, and events. And what do we always ask people to do, Steve?
If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always reach out to us at info@adktaste.com and share your insights.
Yeah, we've gotten some good questions. I think our next episode, we're going to do, maybe not the next one, but we're going to do another reader mailbag soon. So who knows? Send us your question and we may read it on air. In the meantime, thanks for listening and we'll see you out there.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.